So welcome, friends, to North Carolina Dance Education Organization's Workshop Wednesday series. Our topic this evening is sharing your dance education expertise. I am Marissa Nesbit. I am the Vice President for Professional Development on the NCDEO board and kind of one of the main organizers of the NCDEO conference, which will be coming up in February at UNC Greensboro. And I've also done a number of conference presentations for different organizations over the past several years. And my goal in creating this session was to help people become comfortable and answer questions about the process of conference submissions, and hopefully to share some tips for things I figured out the hard way. I'll pass it over to Kelly to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Kelly Scott. I am a member at large on the NCDEO board in charge of committee and conference support. And my expertise is very limited in this area, but I have served as a reviewer for conference support, conference proposals. So that is where my expertise is coming in, is that I've read proposals, and so kind of knowing what a review committee is looking for and making sure that you're meeting all those requirements.
So for this session, we're going to go through some overview information in general about types of conference sessions and things to think about when you're planning a conference proposal, and then some specifics about our NCDEO conference that's coming up soon. And then we will segue into some chance at the end to answer any questions and also look at some questions that people submitted on the registration form that might help. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and pull up our Google thing, and nope, slideshow. Here we go. Real quick, Kelly, I need to make sure that you are a co-host. So if anybody is trying to get in and I don't see them pop up, you can admit people. So today we're primarily going to talk about conference presentations as one avenue for sharing your expertise. Publications is another one, and if that's something that a lot of people are interested in, we can absolutely schedule another session to talk about that. But today we're focusing on conference presentations, and I want us to think about, like, why do this? Why put yourself out there? So one of the biggest things is to contribute to the field. So our field of dance education is really small and really specific and limited, and if we're not putting ourselves out there and sharing our work, there isn't somebody else necessarily who's going to do it. So we make our field, and a big way to do that is by getting involved in conferences. One of the things I appreciate about presenting at a conference is that sessions are interactive, and opposed to publishing where you send something out in the world and you don't know if anybody's reading it or not. Conferences give you a chance to interact with your work. Another really great thing to keep in mind is that for many conferences, the proposal is short. Abstracts are typically anywhere from 250 to 500 words, which is not a whole lot. And because of that, you don't necessarily need to have your work and your idea fully formed before you submit. So I had a friend in grad school who was like, how are all these people doing all these conference presentations when they haven't done their dissertation yet? And I was like, nobody's doing their dissertation. They're doing like a little tiny piece of something, getting one little idea formed and putting it out there. Another great thing is conferences offer you an opportunity to get feedback on an idea prior to developing an article. So in fact, the last couple things that I've submitted started as conference sessions, and I got interest and encouragement from people in a conference session, and then the conference also forced me as a chronic procrastinator to solidify my ideas and get them into some type of format, and then I was able to use that as the outline for then fleshing it out more for a paper. Another nice thing about conference presentations for our field is that you can model ideas and engage participants through doing and questioning and discussing in a way that sometimes can be really difficult in a written format. So that idea that we're just going to do it really is exciting. And then finally, for you personally, conferences give you a chance to build your professional portfolio. And for those of us in higher education, we're really constantly under that pressure of building our CV and our tenure dossiers. But even for folks who are in other employment models, building your professional portfolio as you move up into administration or move up into master teacher status, or build yourself as someone who can be invited in as a guest speaker for different programs. The conferences are a way to get you there. I want to talk today about the types of conference sessions that you're likely to see in dance education settings. So these are the 5 that are most common: papers, panels, posters, pedagogical workshops, and movement workshops. So conference papers are what people in most fields really think of when they think of a conference presentation. They're actually probably less common in dance ed. But papers work well as a format for things that are research oriented, that work in a short format, and that you can engage in the audience with an idea. Typical conference paper sessions that I have seen are about 12 minutes long, or sorry, 20 minutes with 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A. I did one online conference where they realized that 20 minutes of talking on Zoom was way too long, and they gave us 12 minutes. And boy, did that thing have to be tight and timed. But in a 20-ish minute presentation, you're looking at 2,500 to 3,000 words if you were to write out the paper. I've seen some presentations and done some where I've fully written it like a paper and scripted it and read it with a slide deck that accompanied. And then I've done other paper presentations that were really more just talking through a slide deck. Papers work really well for ideas that are research oriented, either presenting a theoretical framework, presenting the results or a discussion or a little slice of an empirical study, building a philosophical argument, or going into historical inquiry. The short format of a paper, you cannot fit an entire research project into a conference paper. And in doing so is a way to get yourself really frustrated, I think. And I found that the most successful ones I've done or that I've listened to and attended are either somebody takes a big study and treats the paper as a summary, or they take one little idea out of a summary and present that and just acknowledge that it's part of a bigger whole. And if you are going to publish an article, the conference paper can be like the advertisement to get people ready to want to go read the full article. The best presentations that I've seen, like so many ways, but especially when it's paper and when it's text heavy, if they're rehearsed really well and we lean into our skills as performers in our dance experience, that can really help, as can illustrations, slide decks, and graphic organizers. Posters are another idea that is a really accessible way to get your work out there. So in creating a poster, you typically create something that's about 4 feet by 3 feet. One giant, you have to print them on a large scale paper at a print shop. There are actually companies that specialize in printing academic posters and shipping them to venues for this. With posters, you want to include the images, and it can feel very much like science fair in terms of kind of blocks of text with images that somebody can walk by and glance at it and get an overview of your project, but then also stay and read up close if they want to know more. With posters, there's definitely an art to deciding what and how much information you want to include. Posters work really well for both research, especially research that's new, so maybe just a theoretical framework or just a pilot study, and also can work really well for sharing a teaching project. One of the things that I like about posters is for a lot of conferences, if they do a poster session, it's very accessible. They often have a high acceptance rate. So if you meet the requirements and all of your information is in the application and it fits the conference theme, they're very likely to be accepted. They're not having to give you a room and put you in the schedule. So they often can add, if they get 50 posters, great. If they get 75 posters, they can probably find space to get them all in there. They're also a really great way to have short conversations with people and get feedback on your work. I really encourage, especially new presenters, new projects, students to do poster presentations. And during a poster session, typically it'll be open for a certain period of time where the posters are displayed and people walk around, they look at your work, and then you're standing there able to have a one-on-one conversation. So you also want to prepare like a 1 to 2 minute elevator speech about your work and then be able to elaborate on that as questions come up. So it can also be less intimidating because you're presenting in a one-on-one format. Panels are really similar to papers in the idea that we have a whole bunch of people who are primarily engaged by speaking to the audience. You often will have a moderator or an organizer who sometimes is also a panelist, but they will organize it. They'll seek out the presenters and provide an organizing theme. This is the question or the topic that we're all going to speak to. Sometimes what'll happen in your formats is that you have a series of papers. So it's really just a way to collect a bunch of papers, and each person will take their turn reading or delivering their talk on their piece of it. Other times it's more interactive where the moderator will pose a question and one or more of the panelists will respond to it. And these are really great ways of building collaborations, of pulling different people together that have different views on a topic, and really where the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. So if we saw this paper over here and this one over here and this one over here, it's like, okay, but when we bring them all together, we see a bigger idea coming out of those different researchers. I'll also say that sometimes panels for the moderator, it's more work because you're organizing and pulling it together. For the actual presenter, sometimes it can be easy because you just have your little slice of it to worry about, or the moderator will give you questions ahead of time and you make notes as to how you want to speak to those questions. And then finally, we'll talk about the workshop type of presentations. So movement workshops that we see at dance conferences often have a heavy emphasis on movement. We want to get people up, moving around. We might be getting sweaty. If we're having the conference in a university or other space with studios, we're going to be able to really do our work because we'll have a good floor and we'll have plenty of space. Movement workshops in conferences that are held in hotels are sometimes iffy because you don't always have the floor that you need, but you can make it work. Typically, a movement workshop would be based on a technique class, a somatic class, or a creative process class. And you really want to take participants through the sense of a full, like the arc of a full class experience. But also for dance ed, we want to give insight into our pedagogical strategies. So as somebody's leading this workshop, they might pause and say, okay, let's consider this from the point of view of the teacher. What I just did was this, this, and this is why I did it. And then they go right back into leading the movement. Jerry Houlihan at ADF, for anyone that's taking class with her. Fabulous, amazing. We love Jerry. I did her dance professionals workshop class like a year and a half ago. She'd be so great in the middle of technique class. She'd just stop and say, okay, this is why I did this. Or have you guys seen this in your teaching? This comes up for me. This is why I'm doing it this way. And then right back into doing the phrase. And that's really helpful when your audience is people who are both teachers and movers. One of the challenging things about doing movement workshops is you really have to clarify what is your focus for this class. You cannot do it all. So you might have a semester-long course that you teach on a particular dance form, and you've got to whittle all that down to 55 minutes. They're most successful when people teach one aspect of it and they build it up so participants feel like they were successful in that one thing about it. It can feel really, really dense. So unless your thing is about feedback, you often look, is the class as a whole getting it and ready to move on? Great, we're moving on. We're not giving corrections and feedback unless that's really essential to what you're doing. Contextual information can help a lot. So including the cultural and historical context of whatever material you're presenting, because it may be unfamiliar or new to your participants. Also contextual information about where you teach, the population you typically work with, the context you work in, so they can see, oh, this is coming out of there. How is that similar or different from my context? And then finally, we have pedagogical workshops. Where's my pedagogical workshop slide? Oh, I skipped over it. Sorry about that. This is really similar to a movement workshop, but it's more focused on modeling teaching strategies. So pedagogy workshops often have a little more sitting and talking, sometimes some writing, sometimes some back and forth. Often the point is to model strategies for your participants and then encourage people to think, how does this apply to my own setting? And they're more frequent moving between my teacher hat and my student hat. So there's a more even balance. Often we have a practice-based focus where we're encouraging people to come up with their own idea for something that they might take and do in their context. This works really well for things that depend on doing. Like, I can tell you about it all day long, but if you just do it with me, I can convey that information in 10 minutes. So definitely recommend this approach for doing focused ideas. The other thing that I have really come to appreciate, and especially at the national NDEO conferences, is that there's a lot of talk about wanting more research, and yet when I've gone to conferences and I've had a nice, really well done, like well-grounded research, like qualitative research project, and I have a presentation on it, 5 people might come, because everybody wants the chance to move and they want the chance to do. And so what I have started doing in recent years is, rather than having 20 minutes to deliver a paper, which is me talking about the research, I flip it into having an hour to engage participants in doing something based on what I've learned from that research, and setting up situations for participants to make discoveries or work with some of your data. So a recent presentation I did at this last NDEO, where I got this cool shirt, I took samples of interview quotes, samples of data from a study I've been working on, and I definitely curated that set of samples, gave them to participants and asked them to look through that data, distill what they were seeing, and then we use that for our next activity. All right. So for our national NDEO conference, if that's something you're interested in participating in, they offer all of these as options for how you can present your work. And I personally have done all except the posters. I've gone to poster presentations and seen them from other people. It's just not something that I personally have done myself, but I've done all of these other types. For our state conferences of NCDEO, we're a smaller one-day conference, and we're more focused on interactive things. So we've made the decision that for now, our one-day conferences only include panels, pedagogical workshops, and movement workshops. That's not to say that posters and papers might not come in a future year, but this is what we're looking at for this year. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Kelly, who's going to tell us about preparing your proposals.
Okay, so there's just a couple of things that what you need to be thinking about as you start to prepare to create your proposal for presentation. Who is your audience? What is the call asking for? Where does your work align? What format could you share it in? And who might you collaborate with? So we're going to just break those down and chat a little bit about each one of those. So who is your audience? Who are the conference participants? Are they dance educators? Is it a more broad audience? Are you talking to students? What level are the educators at? what are their needs? Are they in the classroom? Are they, again, are they students? What context are they in? Is it state level, national level, or international level? And how can you best communicate your ideas to them, whether it be with a paper, a panel, a poster, or a movement type of session. It's very, very important to know who you are going to be delivering your work to so that you can start gauging and creating your proposal to fit the audience that you'll be sharing with. What is the call asking for? So before you really start, getting really excited about what you're doing, really read through what the call is asking for. I know as a reviewer, that is when you get a lot of different proposals, it's hard to narrow them down because you can get really good proposals, but it doesn't quite fit to what the conference theme is. So make sure you're reviewing the theme and all the guiding questions. Those questions are really important because it's going to narrow your focus and take you to what the conference organizers are thinking about wanting the conference to feel like as people move through the different sessions. Not all conferences are going to be utilizing all the different types of sessions that Marissa just went through. So make sure, you don't want to prepare for a poster presentation and the conference isn't accepting posters. And then if you have the opportunity or if it's available, make sure you're reviewing the past conference programs to see what has been presented before, what's worked well. And you can always even if you can't get that information directly from the organization, you can get that from people who've attended those conferences in the past. What did they really like about going to that conference? And so that you can really gear your proposal towards those things. So after you've really dived into the proposal, into the call, you want to see where you fit in. Sometimes that's a big ask because you see sometimes a pretty broad call and you're like, I don't know where I fit in. But more than likely, you are doing something that is going to fit into what the conference is looking for. So brainstorm how your existing work aligns with the conference call. What jumps out to you when you first look through it? What and from those things, where can your work answer those questions? Presenting at a conference doesn't mean that you need to start something from scratch. Like I said, you probably have something or you're doing something currently that will fit into the call. And don't feel like you need to respond to everything. Your work might not fit every single thing, but it's the small focus that is going to help you be more precise and more detailed, and it makes for a more interesting session. Because when we try to, it's just like anything that we do, when we try to do everything, nothing sticks. But when we really narrow down and really focus on one thing, there's so much that can be in that one thing. What format can you share it in? So what works the best for what you're doing? As movers, sometimes our mind immediately goes to a movement session, but as you start brainstorming and thinking about what you are doing or what you're going to present and how it fits into the call, it might not be a movement-based session. It could be that maybe this is something that you can it's more of a chat or a talk through as opposed to getting up and doing. But also, if you are more comfortable moving, then that's where you probably need to be, because if you're not a talker, having to talk for 20 minutes is asking a lot of a non-talker. But so just know where you feel comfortable and then just drill into that. What makes the most sense for your connection with an audience? And if you have collaborators, what format will best allow your strengths and voices to work together? speaking of collaboration, who might you collaborate with? If this is your first time presenting, this would be a great time to maybe reach out to somebody who has a history and who's been presenting and is really comfortable with it, to ask if maybe you can collaborate with them to do your first presentation. And the reverse, if you have been you're an experienced presenter, maybe this is a great time to reach down and to help somebody get their foot in the door and pass on some tips and tricks that you've learned through your presentations, and so that they can feel comfortable doing the same thing. Maybe there's a collaborative project you've been working on, and this would be a great time for all of the people involved to sit down and present together. And do you have a very specific point of view whose viewpoints might complement yours? Just thinking more broadly and less like, with your narrow focus, it might be that there needs to be other voices to help really solidify that work that you're doing. And so really think about reaching outside to reach those topics.
Yeah, and Kelly, I just want to jump in here because this, for me personally, this is huge. I would say probably over half of the conference presentations that I have done have been collaborative. And of those, probably half are ones that I initiated and half are ones that somebody else initiated and invited me to do with them. And in fact, my very first NDEO presentation was a long time ago. Kristen, it was with Juliana, a colleague that we happen to have in common. And we had worked on a project together through Arts Teach. For anyone who's been in Charlotte, North Carolina long enough, Arts Teach was an old arts and education funding stream. And we took our Arts Teach project that we had done as teaching artists and built that into a conference presentation. And I think by doing it with a collaborator, it really helped me feel more confident because I could bounce ideas off of her and we could reference the project that we had in common. And then now that I've been doing this for many years, I've sometimes reached out to other colleagues. Our colleague who's not here tonight on the NCDEO board, Ashley Cartledge, I had worked with her in Greenville where my college students were doing a project in her high school classroom. And as that was going, I'm like, hey, what we're doing fits the upcoming NDEO call. Would you like to put something together? And I can speak to it from the university side. She could speak to it from the high school side. We can engage people. That was her first time coming to NDEO. She had so much fun. She came back the next year and then we got her in NCDEO and now she's doing tons of stuff with the organization. So it's also a really great way to like build our field by bringing other people in. So sorry, I just had to throw that in there, Kelly. Kelly, do you want to talk about this or you want, is this me?
That's you.
This is me. Okay, I'll just keep talking. So as you're doing your proposal, you've kind of thought through all of these questions that Kelly has put out for us. And then as you're drafting, and I came up with this slide because this is really from my experience doing a ton of different kinds of presentations, thinking about what is my connection to that call and what's the need for my work? Like, what can I offer that is grounded in my work and unique? And often I'll see the call and I can think of like 20 different ideas for sessions that would be great for that. But the question is often, well, where does my work, like, what's the thing I can most speak to in there? Another really helpful thing to ask yourself is, what is the theoretical framework or the dance lineages or the techniques that I use? So where's my grounding? And for researchers, that's often like, who am I citing? What theoretical framework? What methodology? Those things might come up. If we're talking about a movement class, it might be what technique, what lineage, if it's a name technique, or am I pulling influences from a lot? Is it a distinct cultural practice? And what's my relationship to that practice? Then thinking, okay, I've got this idea. What's going to happen in the session? What do I want people to do? And or what kind of journey do I want to take them on if I'm going to be giving a paper presentation? And then finally, what do I want them to leave with? Like, they're probably going to get one or two big ideas out of it. Conferences are a place where our brains get really full and we can get overwhelmed easily. So I know people aren't going to take away everything I've shared, but what are the big ideas that I hope they'll leave with? And if I can answer these questions, I'll often do like little notes and brainstorms. And then I often start with an outline of what I think my session or what I think my paper will look like, even if I haven't written it yet. Um, then taking all that, I'll do a narrative draft. So what do I want to say? And I'll often start with saying, establishing why, like, why is this work? Why is this question or this topic useful? And then going into a little bit of the background and then going into a summary sentence or two about what's going to happen in the session. But for that first draft, I really try to get down all of my ideas and not worry about word count. I'll just get it all out there. And then in the editing process, this is where you want to be really specific about your word count. So a lot of conference sessions will have a limited to words. Now the national NDEO portal that they started using has a character count. So I'll write it all in Microsoft Word or Google Docs and use the tools feature to track my words or my characters to get a sense. And then I'll go in and refine and refine and refine again. I am always, as you can tell, very wordy. So I have to really tighten it up. And in that process, it's very much about getting rid of unnecessary words. So we often will say, in this presentation, I will. The reader already knows that it's a presentation. You don't need to tell them that. So things like that, like I'll write them and then I'm like, okay, I might not need to say this. I might not need to say this. I use 3 words for this, but I can say it in 1. The other part of that editing process is to keep going back and looking at the call. And are there keywords from that call that I can put into my title or into my session description? So that it's really explicit how my session connects to that call. Now, if it's not a connection, it's not a connection. You don't want to force it. But if it is, reiterating keywords from the conference call in my session proposal can really help reviewers see that this is relevant. And I have some examples I can share with you. Oh, the examples are next. So I want to share with you, and we'll also send out this slide deck so you will have all these links. But I want to share with you some of the proposals that I have done in the past that might be useful to you. So this first one I would like to share with you, I'm going to pull it up and then I'm going to screen share. Would you give me a thumbs up, Kelly and y'all, if you can see that, right? Yes, okay, thank you. This is one that I just did at our most recent NDEO conference. And this is the one I mentioned. It was about research that I did on classroom assessment in dance education. This is a huge study. I had 14 teachers and I interviewed them each for about 5 hours. So I have lots and lots of data. I'm not going to make any presentation on all of it. But the conference theme this year was about leadership. So I said, okay, how can I translate this project into something about leadership? And I really thought about this idea of the way my research participants were leaders because they were figuring out how to work within a K-12 school system lingo and framework around assessment and make it work for dance. So then you get a 900 character limit, which is really not very much. And this session description is also what goes in the program book in the app. So this is what people are reading when there's 10 things going on at once and they're deciding if they want to spend that hour with you. So I really wanted to also make it feel amenable to teachers. So like leading right there, we're assessment experts, like putting that right out there. And then talking about, what the context is, then moving into, again, a reference to leadership, to leading in educational spaces, and then talking about what our solution is making the practices legible. And then I come in and say, okay, now we're going to get really specific about formative assessment. and what we're doing, and then clarifying that it's a research-based workshop. So, which is, again, doesn't have to be, but that's where this particular one was. And then leading into a description. Here's all the things that are going to happen if people come to this session. This top part of the proposal and the title and then the presenter biography, those are the only things that in that conference the audience sees. But then for NDEO, they have all these other questions that you have to answer into tell the reviewers, and you actually get more words to answer the reviewer questions for theirs. So then they ask this question: how are you approaching this topic? What concern or question led you to the development of the proposal, and how have you organized your work? So this is where I sort of gave the behind the scenes look at the research project and what I was doing with it. Then they ask, how are you taking existing practice or research and applying it? So what they want to know is that there is something new, not that you are just rehashing the same way that you've been teaching your technique class for the last 20 years, but what's already been happening, and now how is this a new thing? How is this taking the field forward? There's also a certain idea about legitimacy, I think, that's embedded in that. And then they ask, what will session attendees experience? So particularly in a workshop, they want you to show that, you're not just going to sit around and talk about it. So for me, I elaborated, the last sentence I gave an overview, and then here I'm going to tell you a lot more about detailed what's going to happen. And then finally, in the past several years, NDEO has been asking for people to be more explicit about DEI issues and how that relates to their conference presentation. And so again, in this, you want to be authentic and true to what you're doing. Don't oversell what you're doing, but also give a lot of serious thought to how does diversity and equity and inclusion play into the work that your session is based on, as well as to what you will share with participants. So in this one, they give you a 400 word limit. So they really want you to get into it with this one. And so I talk about how I'm drawing, data from a lot of diverse communities. I also talk about some of the research sources, in this case, Grading for Equity, that kind of underlies some of how I'm thinking about these issues. And then finally talk about how formative assessment done well, which is what we're going to talk about in the session, can promote equity and responsive student-centered pedagogy. So in that process of going through these conference sessions, I'm going to stop the share real quick. We sort of see different ways that you can look at one and sort of distill and take it apart. And when I go back and look at conference presentations that I've done over the years and the proposals, I find that I tend to follow a pretty similar format of introducing the problem, saying what my take on it is or what my solution is, and then what I'm going to do in a session. And I find that for pedagogical workshops and for research presentations, that can be really effective. I'll share with you another one that is interesting, because this one I double dipped. So when you have a good idea, you don't need to do it once and be done. You can take the same thing and do it in more than one context. So this one that I'm sharing now is from the 2020 North Carolina Dance Education Organization. This was the one of the two conferences when I wasn't on the board and I could actually come and present. And this conference incidentally happened in February of 2020, right before the world is, shut down. So, and I had just come to UNC Charlotte and was starting on some new projects. And so for this one, the conference theme was technology, assessment, and artistry in dance. Huge topic, but 3 very specific words that they were asking for people to speak to. And since I do a lot of stuff with assessment, I was like, well, there's my word that I'm going to latch onto. In this one, they asked for an abstract So I kind of set up the theoretical position and the participant point of view and why we need it. We often operate as departments of one, and we're the only ones doing the planning, instruction, and assessment. And that we're communicating a lot of values to our students by these choices that we make. And when it comes to assessment, we often can ask, well, what else is out there? This is the way I do it, but what else is out there? And so then I kind of gave this guiding question: how do the assessments we choose impact the information we discover, the frame we communicate within, and the progress we document? Together, we will sample several assessment options, examine the communication each makes possible, and reflect on the ways assessment can support, extend, or challenge our values. So that was kind of the workshop-y part of that. And in this session, it was super fun. I made my students be fake high schoolers, and they had a choreography prompt that these high schoolers had created, and the participants had 4 different rubrics or response forms that they rotated through practicing filling out. So it was, then you could compare, well, I use this rubric and I use this rubric, and we assess the same dance. How was our communication similar and different based on what we set up? And then they asked for these other kinds of strategies to talk about what we're doing. Then the following year, the national conference had a theme of dance and society, developing community, empathy, and understanding through dance. And so for that, I was basically doing the same session, proposing really similar, but I reworded it. I had a little greater word length limit, so I expanded it a little bit. And I pulled in these words, understanding and empathy, to help frame what I was talking about, even though the actual structure of the session was very, very similar. And then, of course, the world shut down and it became an online session. But at the time I wrote this, I didn't know it would be online. So I tweaked it a little when it went to the online thing. I am going to stop the share now, and I'm going to pass it over to Kelly to talk about a couple of the movement workshops that we've done. Kelly, you want me to pull up Jerry's?
Yes, please. So the 2 that we're going to look at are sessions from our last, most recent NCDEO conference. And so we're going to look at Jerry Houlihan's, and our theme was replenishing the spirit, dancing for connection and renewal. So this session was entitled Community Moves, the Joy of Movement. And so right away, she tells you who this session is for. It's an intermediate level class. It is grounded in the fundamentals of traditional modern techniques, particularly the work of Jose Limon. So you know right from the beginning what's happening and who this class is for. It focused on concepts of alignment, core strength, and efficiency of movement. And it pays particular attention to musicality, phrasing, and the use of dynamics to develop a personal sense of exploration and encourage a freedom and ease while moving through the space. So like Marissa said earlier, if you've ever had the pleasure of taking class with Jerry, she's just a phenomenal educator. And so she in that little snippet, she encompassed everything that we were asking for in the call, because we wanted teachers, educators to find the joy of coming back together and finding filling yourself up and finding freedom through movement or whatever else. And so she, like, just at the beginning with the title, it's talking about the community comes together and you're going to be happy about it. And that's exactly what we wanted. We were looking for in these sessions. So the second one we're going to look at is from Ashley Tate, and her session was a hip hop session, movement session. So right from the beginning, she's talking about multiple intelligences through hip hop. And this really leaned into diversity and and inclusion. And so this first sentence, technique behind the movement of there is a technique behind the movement of hip hop, and it's driven by the human response to music. The use of hip hop music and dance as a vehicle for sharpening our cognitive transmission can benefit how we listen to all music and body movement and develop our polyrhythmic and polycentric capabilities. So again, it's telling you what the purpose is for this session and why she's doing it. And then it tells you what you're going to be doing. Attendees will be taken through various exercises and activities that can be used to increase the students' musical awareness and promote visual and body kinesthetic intelligence. So you know what you're doing. We're going to be doing hip hop dance, and we're going to go through different exercises that are going to bring more awareness to our to music and the different type of body intelligences. What Ashley did a great job here is that she knew who her audience is, so she tied it right back in to the aligning it with the standards that that educators in North Carolina are trying to meet. So bringing that right to the forefront. This is going to focus on things that you are already teaching, that educators, it can make that alignment for us. And then replenishing this, how does it connect? The question was, how does your session relate to the conference theme of replenishing the spirit? And dancing for the connection and renewal. And she says hip hop culture is rooted in community and it builds community. So she just answered the question, well, how does your work satisfy what we are looking for in this call? And just answer the question. You don't have, it doesn't need to be flourished. It doesn't need to be, you don't have to pretty it up. Just put it out there, because that when a reviewer is reading, there's so many different ones that you have to read through, and we don't need the pretty language. We just want to know what you're doing and what it has to do with what we're asking for.
And I think keeping in mind that your reader doesn't know you and doesn't know your work. So even if it's to you, I'm all about community, and this is, you know, I live it, I breathe it, I do this every day. It might feel like stating the obvious to put that in there, but it really does help on the other side of it when people are looking at these things. There are, I do also have in the slide deck, but I don't want to get into it today, an example of a paper presentation that I wrote. So for anybody who's looking for more on conference papers, I will say what's interesting, I realized after I pulled this into this, I have a paper that I did for Dance and the Child International, which is a wonderful international conference on dance education that I've gone to a couple times. I did that for their online conference in Toronto, but it was online. That was the 12-minute. It was super tight. Did it, then turned that paper into a workshop for NDEO, so that instead of just talking about the activities, we actually did the activities. And then after the NDEO session, then I was like, well, I have this all outlined. It's all there. I just got to write it. So I forced myself to sit down a few months later and write the article, and it will come out in Jode at the end of the year. So that was kind of an interesting way of sort of one thing leading to another, all about the same project. So you can check that out later if that's something you're interested in. Kelly, do you want to talk about these guiding questions? Let me pull up the share on this real quick, and then we'll say a few things about the upcoming NCDEO conference, and then take some time to answer some questions before we end tonight. Kelly, you want to talk about this one?
Yes. So our theme this year for the NCDEO conference is advocacy and action, celebrating the impact of dance. So these are the guiding questions to help you narrow your focus and see how your work can be connected with our call. Through movement and conversation, we will explore how do we demonstrate and celebrate excellence in our dance classrooms and larger communities. How can we center joy in our curriculums while ensuring that dance is seen as appropriately deserving of a place in students' education? How do we make learning and dance visible to students, parents, administrators, and other stakeholders in our communities? And how do we show the multiple layers of dance education, including creativity, problem solving, interpersonal communication, and embodied learning. Really what we're looking for or asking is like, what does it look like? What does advocacy look like to you through your work? Like, how are you communicating that to your community, to your students, to your administrators, to your parents? How is that happening within your community? And what does that look like in the work that you are doing daily? So as you start thinking about your proposal for the conference, really dive into these questions. Like we said before, every question you don't have to answer. But maybe there is one question that really is jumping out at you and you're like, I really, really feel strong that the things that I am doing, this one particular thing that I feel really confident in would really fit into advocacy and action.
Yeah, I'll second that with Kelly. I think if I tried to answer all of these questions, it would take me, 24 hours. So really picking one or two that comes out to you. And I know several of you on this call. I know Lorraine, I can like envision so much about your teaching fitting so many of these questions. Elsie's classroom is just this beautiful space that you create. And so I also feel like this question, I feel like maybe this question number 2, Elsie, is like your classroom, and I kind of want to see how you answer this. How do we center joy while ensuring that dance is seen as having this place of rigor, right? Like, how do you, because you do that, and I've seen it. So, can you distill that and share it with people if that's the question you want to pick up on? So, using those guiding questions. And then when you get into the proposal form, there's really just 3 main questions that you have to write a lot of words to explain. Everything else is just tick the box. But the 3 main questions you want to spend some time thinking about are your session descriptions. And for this, we're asking 250 words max. So get it and then distill it down into that. And then also those 2 questions that you saw on the prior ones. How does your session serve the professional development needs? Because this is a PD event for North Carolina dance educators, keeping in mind that our constituency is K-12, community, studio, and higher ed, and people like Lorraine and like Elsie who work in multiple of those. Like Elsie, I think you're hitting like all of them in terms of your teaching context, right? And we have a lot of people who cross those boundaries. So how does it serve the needs for all of those folks? And how does your session relate to that theme? So that's where you can explicitly state, and you might even say, my session is answering this piece of this question from the call. Like, this is what I'm speaking to. This is how it relates. In your resource folder that Ashley Tate will send out after our workshop is done with this recording and the slide deck, you can also link to a PDF that shows you the entire Google form. If you find that you like to sort of preview it and do your stuff in a document, and then when you have it ready, put it in that Google form and click submit. That is helpful for some folks. So again, my suggestions for kind of a process in thinking about drafting your proposal, which we've already talked about, and then pitch for our conference. It will be Saturday, February 3rd at UNC Greensboro. And you can find the call for proposals, which has the same information you just saw on the previous slide, a link to the submission form, and then a link to that form preview PDF, which might be helpful as you're brainstorming and getting your ideas. Our deadline is very soon, November 4th, but I think you can do it. I've often written many a decent proposal in, I won't say fantastic one, but a decent one in under a short time. I think most of these tips we have already talked about. But I will say one thing. that I would encourage you to do is to also seek feedback. So it's great if anything you write has seen another set of eyes before you turn it in. So having a colleague look at your proposal. You're also welcome to reach out to me or Kelly, or if you know other NCDEO board members, we're all hands on deck to produce this conference. I am more than happy to do a one-on-one phone call or Zoom meeting with a presenter who's like, hey, I've got these ideas, but I'm not sure how to get it into the conference session. Sometimes just talking it out with someone, and sometimes I'll hear someone tell me a lot of things and I'll say, well, these are the things I'm hearing, and of those, these two would really meet the needs of our conference. So consider doing that. And then as you send stuff in, remember, we have a curatorial role in selecting proposals. So we don't just score them and take the top scoring ones, because we want to be sure that we have diverse types of sessions. We have different presenters coming in. We have a mix of movement and pedagogy and talking. So in the past, there have been a situation where we got 4 fabulous proposals on really similar topics. And they're just going to divide an audience. So we had to make some hard choices. And likewise, sometimes we have people submit more than one. And it's like, oh, all of these are fabulous, but we can really only ask you to do one because we have to make room for other presenters. Yeah, so I want to turn it over to you all. I'm going to stop sharing and see if we have, I know we're close to time, but I'd love to hear any ideas people have or questions that they would still like to talk about. I could see Lorraine, you over there like writing and stuff. So she's got all the notes. Awesome.
Marissa,
Yeah.
do you have a link to the call, or like when I try to just Google search, I can't get anything
Our
on
website is a
NCDEO.
big mess that is in the process of being updated.
Gotcha.
Let me throw these into the chat for you. And then it'll all be also in the file that Ashley Tate will send out to you.
Thank you.
Yep. There's the call, and here is should be our submission form as well. And please send that link to the call out far and wide to everybody you know. Help us get the word out. What else can we answer for you?
Are there any topics that you feel like are you're really looking for, or any the reverse of that, any topics that you feel like, okay, we've done this already, let's move on from this particular thing?
I know that in our survey from last year, there was a tap class and a couple hip hop sessions, and I don't know if there was jazz, but Karen Hubbard won the Lifetime Award, and there was a whole jazz thing at the end that I didn't know she was going to do when the conference. It went kind of longer than I anticipated, but it's Karen Hubbard, so you just keep going and you just keep dancing. And I had several folks commented that they really like seeing tap and jazz and hip hop in that space, and could we make places for that? So if that's your area, definitely encourage movement in that. People tend to like having something somatic-y. So we usually try to have a somatics, take care of your body, go internal, relaxation, something somatic-y in the conference in a couple blocks. So yeah, I would say there's nothing that jumps out as like, oh, it's been there, done that. I think if you're thinking about your work in a way that relates to the conference theme, then it can definitely fit. A lot of teachers also really like things that they can take away. So is there an opportunity for them to take a nugget from it and put it in their class in the next week or the next month? We hear from teachers that they appreciate that. And then I'll also say one of our goals on the board is to use our conference as a community building event. So any opportunity for participants to interact with each other during the session and meet each other and do something collaborative, even if it's just like go across the floor with a partner and learn their name as you go. But opportunities to reflect and opportunities to connect with other people during the session, as opposed to just hearing information from a presenter, can be really valuable.
Okay.
Do you guys have a sense from the past as to what like their percentage of participants from higher ed or practicing teachers and undergraduate or graduate students who participate in the conference has been? As I think about like panel discussions or who my audience is, I'd just be interested in if you have any insight to that.
I feel like it was, I mean, I'm making a wild guess here without pulling up the data, but I feel like it was probably about, what do you think, Kelsey?
I think it was pretty even with everybody, private sector. It was actually quite diverse in that compared to the national conference this year. The national conference it was heavy on K-12 this year, but our conference in North Carolina was very diverse in different sectors. I was in that position on the panel last year. I was like, who am I talking to? And I realized I could pull from all the stuff I do, so I could hit everybody. I was just thinking about how diverse it was in the different private studios. Private studios was a little bit, I'll say that'll be a little bit low, but K-12, there was higher ed, there was everybody and everything.
I think in terms of students attending, in years past, there's a few years where we did a performance at the end of the day that drew a lot of college students because they were performing. We've had to step away from doing that in our conferences for a variety of reasons. If somebody really is passionate and wants to bring that back, there will be a board call. Please come join the board and help us organize it next time, Lorraine. Yes. With the college students, I know for my students, like dance ed students that I send to the conference, I really appreciate it when sessions are geared towards practicing teachers, and my students have to kind of step into their teacher mindset when they're in that role and not just be comfortable taking class in a student mindset, but also when somebody talks to them as if they are a teacher. It doesn't matter if maybe you've only taught a handful of lessons as part of your clinical in your course. You're a teacher now. We're going to treat you like it, and we're going to engage with you professionally in that way.
What have you found the least effective as an attendee in a session? You went to one, you were excited about the topic, and then you found yourself maybe underwhelmed. What would be some of those things that we could potentially avoid underwhelming our audience with?
I've been to a few panels or panels that opened up to like group discussion where it turned into a venting session and it like goes off the rails, and those don't feel particularly effective. And I've been to a few, and probably guilty of doing this myself, of trying to cram too much information into a session. I have come to appreciate the art of doing less, and sessions that kind of like leave a little space in between for people to respond and reflect, leaving space at the end for questions. There was one I went to at NCDEO this past time that really felt like it was wrapping up about 10 minutes before time, but then they use that last bit of space to engage some questions, and they did it really effectively. And it felt like, oh, they could have thrown in one more activity, but I think it was a really smart choice that they didn't, because of pulling that out. I don't know, Kelly or anybody else, if you have a thought for Lorraine's question.
I'll speak on it. I'm trying to charge my phone on this couch charger. I'm sorry. So I've got my little head. Anything that no takeaway. I don't like any session that there's no takeaway. Especially when it's a heavy topic like we did implicit bias. And that was awesome. Like she had a takeaway, like because we had everybody knew, okay, I have some biases about me. And then what do you do about it? Then we go. But she didn't do that. She gave us like, okay, now what do you do? And she gave us some takeaways of what's next. How's that look in your classroom? How's that look in your life? So that And anything that does not have any awareness of inclusion, because then I'm a middle school teacher in public school. I'll be like, where are my Black and brown people in this? I don't know what's happening, and I don't like anything with no inclusion, because you're only thinking about one area.
Yeah, thank you for that, Elsie. Those are really great points. Okay, well, I think our brains might be full. And we're past time. Thank you, Kelly, for co-presenting this with me and being my buddy on the board. Thank you all for joining us and being part of this. Again, I really hope that you'll consider submitting a proposal and encouraging your colleagues to join us. And if you have questions or I can help in any way with getting you to be part of our conference, please reach out, because that's my job, is to curate a really great conference. And we don't want the same university professors to be presenting over and over and over. We want to cultivate as many new voices. We have so many amazing dance educators in our state, such a wealth of information, and our job as NCDEO is to create the conditions for that to flourish and for it to be shared. So that's what we're all about. We want you to be part of it. So thank you very much for being with us, and look for an email from Ashley Tate in the coming days that will link you to the slide deck I was using, and all the links and examples, as well as the recording of this. Yeah. All right. Thank you all.